Hello guys, welcome back. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. In this video we're going to cover data validation. We're going to validate the data that we get sent from the client. So we're going to validate that data before it actually gets submitted to our database. We're going to use a library called JOI. So let's go ahead and install it. npm install JOI, and while it's installing, I want us to create a file in here called validation.ts, and we have installed our, as you can see in here, we have installed our JOI. So we can now write code that we're going to use to validate the data that we get from the client, right? So we want to make sure before we even try to submit anything to the database that we have validated that data and it's in the correct format. So let's start with the simplest one, but first let's import JOI from JOI. So we're going to validate login data. And usually when someone tries to log in, they send their email and they also send their password, right? So you want to ensure that the email field actually contains a valid email and the password also contains something, right? Because sometimes they might not submit anything. So we're gonna have login here. Login, this is what we pass, and we're going to create a JOI schema that we're going to validate against this. So we create a schema and then we're going to compare with whatever data that we send here, and then if it matches that schema, it means we have the right format and we have the right data. Then we can go ahead and submit it to the database. So let's create the login schema here, and it's going to be JOI object. And then inside the object, we create how this login should look like. We say we expect it to be an email, and JOI provides types. So we're going to say this email is going to be a string and it's going to be an email, because we need to make sure it's a string and also it's an email. If we just leave it like this, even this is going to be considered to be valid. So we want to make sure that we say this is an email and we say this field is required. And then what else do we need? We need the password field. We say we're also going to have a field that is supposed to be a string and supposed to be at least have a minimum of 8 characters, and then maybe maximum could say 36. And then also this field is required. Since now that we have created this JOI schema, so we can take this and compare it against this schema, right? So we're gonna return login schema and validate it against this login here. So if this login does not match this schema here, so it means there was a problem. If it doesn't match, it means maybe the email was not provided, or it was in incorrect format, and also the password, maybe it might have had less these characters or overdid, right? And then also here, since we're using TypeScript, we're gonna say this object has an email, and that the email is a string, and it also has a password which is a string. And then we need to export this and save. So basically this is it. So we're going to send data, or we're going to send data yes to this, and we're going to compare it against this schema we have provided here. And then if they do not match, it means the user or the client has provided incorrect information or incorrect data. So before we even try to do any sort of data operation, I mean database operation, we would have rejected the request because the data is incorrect, in incorrect format. We also gonna do the user validate user data. So we are validating when this is when the user when the user logs in, when the user registers. So when the user tries to register, we also want to validate that they need to submit, we need to verify that they have supplied or they have provided the information that we need for them to be able to register. Just like here in our models, you can see before you actually register, we need to have the name, the email, the active flag, which is not really required, and we also need the password, right? So we can essentially use this interface in here and say the type of this user is gonna be user, and import. And then just like here, we're just going to define the schema, the JOI schema, or yes, user schema. And we're going to say this object function, the type is user. And then since we are using this object, I mean in this function, since we're using the type user, so it already knows the fields that are actually needed. So if I do this, you can see we have already it knows it's expecting these 4 fields. So we have the password. We can copy this line here and edit here, and we have the name JOI string, and we can say minimum, we at least expect 2 characters, and then we say required, and the active flag is JOI, and it's gonna be a boolean, but then it's not required because it's going to be provided by our mongoose model here once it gets submitted to the database. And then we can also use the same line here, return user schema, and validate the data that we have sent here, which is user. So we're just going to implement this function, and then I'm going to show you later on how we use them. Now we're going to validate when you try to submit a company. Constant validate company data, and here we get company, company, and like the user, we have the interface implemented already, so we still going to do the same line like this. So we have constant company schema JOI object, and our type here is the iCompany. And since we have provided with that, so it knows what exactly it expects. But before we actually continue, if you remember correctly, if you have watched the previous video, you know that the location is, we basically nested an object here. Let me open company here, and then if you look at the company, I mean the location, you can see the type of this location is a location schema, which means we have an object inside an object. So we're essentially going to implement it the same way we did with the mongoose. So we're just going to say location schema here, JOI.object iLocation, and it knows that we are expecting a country, and we're gonna say JOI.string country is supposed to be or at least minimum 2 characters, and we require it. And then we also have a city. There's a problem here. Location, did you mean location? So let me try to import location, and here it's supposed to know that we are talking about, we need a city. We need a city which is supposed to be a string, and it's not required, and then we can just leave it like this. And then so here we're just gonna say location in this company schema has to match this type here. So the location here has to match this location schema, and we also gonna say this is required. And then what else about JOI string required, company size JOI, and we expect the JOI company size to be a number, and it's also required. We have an email which we can simply copy this line from here and paste it here. And what else do we need? We need the name of the company, which we should have copied from here also. Copy, paste. What else do we need? User ID. So user ID will essentially be provided after we have confirmed this. So we might not necessarily need to say is required here. I'm gonna show you why we say it's not required in a minute. So JOI is gonna be, let's say the type is gonna be any, and the last one is website, and we're just gonna say JOI dot string and required. And then here you can go further and use regex to ensure that this website is not just only a string, but it's a valid website, right? So now we just simply going to do the same thing, company schema dot validate, and we're going to validate this function here. Not this function, not this schema, but actually this company. We're not necessarily going to use the location schema here because we have embedded it in this company schema. So far we have implemented the function that validates the company data, that validates user on registration and user on login. So we can go into our controllers, and let's start with the user one. So if you look here, this is register. If you look here, do you see how we actually did our validation? So we don't really want to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's say valid, and we're going to validate login data, and then we pass in the request.body. And instead of verifying like this, I need us to just return here, and what I need is to console log the valid. Of course we're gonna have an error. Okay, wait a minute, let me just have a valid here. Okay, so far I just need us to what I need us to do is just to send the data to our valid login data, and return. Okay, we're gonna have a problem. So since it needs the email, and so we know for sure once it gets on this line, we would have already validated that the company, the email and password exist, right? And they're in the correct format, and you can simply do this and extract body dot email constant password and request body dot password, because we know once it gets to this part we would have already verified that the email. So TypeScript is complaining, even though we know, because like I said, we know once this line here passes, it means we are sure that the email and the password exist in the request object or the request body.email. We know we can get the request.body and password. And then here TypeScript obviously is complaining that this code is unreachable and the object is possibly null. So what I'm essentially going to do is like remove this return statement here. It should fix everything. And I still want us to console this so we can actually see how it looks. So let me save this and open our terminal and run the project. npm run dev, and I'm also going to open Postman because we're using it to test our API. No, I'm not searching anything. Let me make it small. Our server is running and we are also connected to the database. So let's try to do some login user, and then we still have these opened up, and I need us to remove the email, and let's send this. We get email or password is incorrect, obviously, because our function here, our expression here essentially isn't really the reason why it got triggered, but I wanted us to look at this. So we got an error saying we provided invalid data, but then if you look at the object here, we have value. This is actually the value that you provided, and then the error is the object that contains information of the missing details or whatever that did not match according to our schema. So even if though we may have provided the email, let me go back here, let me provide the email, but then let me make sure it's not in the correct format. We know this is not a valid email, so let's send. We should still get a failed message because it must be a valid email. The email field was provided, but it was not a valid email. So once we don't have any error here, this error field or this error field, yes, this error field will essentially be undefined. So what we need to do is to clean up this. What we need to do is remove this and say if there is error. So if error is not undefined, so it means it's there, so this line will pass, and then we're gonna reply with this. Remove this. Okay, let me explain again. We are verifying. So what we're essentially doing is this function will return an object like this which contains value and the error, and error will contain all the errors that our object or whatever that we're trying to validate contains. So whatever errors that exist, they're gonna be in this error object. But then if there is no error, this error field will be undefined. So we're saying if there is error, so we either have a problem with the password or the email. That's why we are actually sending this message. So let's test. We have this send, because this is not a valid email, and .gmail.com. We should be expecting a different message. It means our validator validated that our function actually validated that the data that was provided was in the correct format. It was an email and then it was a password. Let's see. Let me go back to the password. The password, we said it actually needed to be at least 8 characters. So let me reduce the number of the characters and send, we get an error because the password does not meet the requirement, which is supposed to be 8 characters. So we can go ahead and test other validators or the validation functions that we implemented. So let's say in this case a user wants to register. Look at this is a bit messy, right? So essentially gonna do constant valid again and say validate register user. What was the function? Yes, this, and request dot body, we just simply sending this, and we saying valid dot error. So if the valid dot error is defined, it means we have a problem. Otherwise, we simply gonna need to get the email from the request.body.email. And what else we're gonna need? We're also gonna need the password, body.password, and we're also gonna need the name. Or we can do this on one line, request.body, and email, password, and name. Yes, so we know if this error is defined, it means the user must have provided incorrect or invalid data upon registration. But then if this passes, we know we have both the email, password. We actually have the email, the password, and the name, which are required for user to register. So now if you go ahead and try to register, so let me open up this, open the function, this request here to register. I'm simply going to do this. User provided invalid details because we didn't provide. If we do this, let me console log the valid object here, so we see the errors that we get. So wait, let me see. So now that our service is running, let's head back to Postman. If I hit send, obviously user provided invalid details because the password should be at least 8 characters. And if you open up here, as you can see here, it says password length must be at least 8 characters long. So it means we have a problem. So we're saying user provided invalid details, even though we would assume that the client side would have prevented the user from submitting in incorrect or invalid details, but we are still ensuring that we actually verify the data before it gets submitted to our database. So let me go back to Postman and actually provide a right password, but then the name we said at least must be 2 characters. And then if we remove it, or actually let me just remove the name altogether and see what kind of an error we get. We get user provided invalid details, and here we say name is required. It means this field was not provided. So I think so far it pretty much makes sense what we're actually trying to do. So we can remove this and go back to Postman and try to actually provide the right things. So let's say Liverpool is the name, and yeah, Liverpool. Okay, let's leave it like this. Send, and user already exists because the email already exists. So let's say Liverpool at test.com, and then we have registered. Next is company registration. It's in the controller. Add new company. So what we're going to do, yes, we can actually take this company here, new company, and constant validate company data, and new company is the data that we want to verify. And we say if valid.error, we simply say throw our thingy error with 400 and say company details provided are invalid. If this passes, we know the company details are provided are in the correct format, and we can go ahead and try to save that company. So let's go back to our Postman and test this. Add a new company. Hopefully everything is still there. Let me actually try to do this. Console log.valid. Now that our server is running, where's this line? We can go ahead and try to remove this and leave the location object to be empty. And this is supposed to be an error because we said the location has to contain at least the country property. So if the country is not there, this is supposed to be an error. The problem is on our end, so we got a really serious problem here. The problem is on our end. Let's try to send it again. There is a problem. I need us to return. Let's do this. Console log dot message and see what actually the problem is, because clearly there is some sort of exception that gets thrown. Let's send again. Open this. Object schema cannot be a JOI schema. We actually might have a problem here. I think, let's see, I'm assuming the problem might be actually the location. Let me remove this. Let me just say location schema here and see how it goes, because it seems like the problem indeed was on our end, just like we said here. So let me see if this is not a problem. Okay, we don't have a problem, and then let's wait for our server to run. So we are connected, and then now let's try to remove this. Submit. Company provided are invalid. So now there's no longer any exception that gets thrown because company invalid detail, because location country is required, right? Not because location city is required. Remember, city is not really required, right? So it means if we return back Nigerian, say Congo, and it should actually pass, and we have submitted our company, we have added our company. So it means our validation functions in here work. So just wanted to show you that you actually need to validate the data before you actually send it to the database. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching this, and please don't forget to subscribe. Next time.